it's been interesting seeing how the wedding industry has changed so much, because there are the brides that are still eloping, or doing, three people there, as far as, just close family members, for witnesses or what have you. But yeah, I mean, this is all changing because the people that were planning on having a 160 person wedding, well, if they can't do that in the next year or 2 years, are they going to just postpone indefinitely? Or are they going to say, okay, we'll settle for 30 people at our wedding, but now we don't need a caterer to that extent. Now we don't need, 60 cupcakes or what have you. So it's just interesting to kind of see like how things, how focus shifts, and what is more important to the bride. Like, is it the dress, or is it the location, or is it, it's redefining the industry, really. And I think that it's kind of reminiscent of the era when people would like have backyard weddings and have the little courthouse weddings, or, at the local church, or, whatever they would do, where it was just a smaller event. And it's interesting to see how the impact of it emotionally on the couple too, like the intimacy of it versus, I definitely can say as a wedding designer that people tend to want to show off. That's their day. That's, they want to be seen. But when the only way to do that is through the scope of Instagram or Facebook or, social media right now, sharing photos, yeah, it makes the smaller details, I think, a little bit more, there's more thought that goes into the reasons of why in the details. So they're more using things from their grandparents or their mom's dresses or things like that. Or, you're seeing more of a traditional aspect. Brides are getting jewelry that comes from like their culture. So it's interesting to see how it's kind of shifting from this mass marketed, money making machine that is the bridal industry into like, this is your day and there's only so much you can do with it. So how do you really define yourself in this day as a bride? And, a lot of the brides I've been working with, they have been postponing their weddings. But I've got brides in October who are still like, yeah, everything's on, everything's, same to plan. And we'll just kind of cut things down as need be as time rolls on. So.
Do you feel like, especially during this time, there's a bit more of a desire and a bit more of maybe a need for people who, especially considering all the disconnection we've had, to want to connect with things that maybe feel familiar or things that feel traditional or maybe feel.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So I pivoted very much a 180 into doing masks, as I'm sure you've seen. And the inspiration behind my mask design was that 17th of May is Norwegian Constitution Day. My family's Norwegian. And there's always a parade in Valor. There's always a huge gathering. It's a huge social event. You wear your traditional costume. And it's like as big as Christmas in our culture. I got canceled this year. Gatherings of 3,000 to 30,000 people, just to keep everybody safe. And there was kind of a vacuum left in where that day was going to be, as far as getting together with family, getting together, and all of the cultural aspects, and what sharing with your culture and reconnecting with that on an annual basis can be. I was really feeling like I was going to be missing out, and it was a very palpable like depression for a couple of days. Like, well, what does this mean to me and to others too? Because I can't be the only one. So I started making the Norwegian flag masks to show my pride in my heritage. And I thought, well, it's not just the Norwegians that are going to feel disconnected. So like, why not make masks from around the world? Because nobody can see their family. Nobody can share with their culture, their different holidays that they're used to. So that was kind of my point of like, how do we make things more relevant and about us? And I hear so many of my customers that call or, email me is talking about, how that has made a difference for them as well, because they're thinking about the old country. They're thinking about their great grandparents who immigrated and, a bread that they would make that now, because everybody's like making bread right now, just kind of that recreation of the old ways and also making them our own in this generation and in this era. So it's really interesting to see how there is kind of a resurgence of like cultural pride.
Absolutely, and especially as it pertains to the Pacific Northwest, having so many cultures represented, and there's this feeling of pride in oneself and one's family, and there's also this feeling of pride in our community and how individuality can be celebrated and how businesses can be elevated. And so many
Mm-hmm.
people are just asking, I recognize that these folks over here are struggling restaurateurs. How do we help and how do we pivot? And I don't feel like a lot of that is really geared towards the fashion industry right now. I don't feel like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people know how to help other
Yeah.
than a face mask. And a lot of that is due to the pressure that they're getting from their daily lives to have one. For example, you can't walk into a Costco without a face mask. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but as it pertains to fashion specifically, in what ways do you, or I guess I should say, do you feel supported by your fashion community? And if you wouldn't mind describing what specific ways really stand out to you.
Yeah, well, what's been really cool is, like you said, manufacturing as we know it is decimated. There's no way to a room sewing whatever, sweatpants or what have you. So there's definitely the reinvention of the wheel occurring. And what I've done as a designer here in the Pacific Northwest is I've gone to seamstresses who I worked with before that are, wedding dress tailors, that are out of work right now. And I've said, okay, like, make me masks, help with production, or going to restaurateurs, servers, bartenders that don't know how to sew. They know how to cut things and they can be taught those things. So I'm taking people that are otherwise unemployed, um, and other designers who are out of work and who aren't making dresses right now, and I'm putting work in their hands and saying like, okay, this takes all of us. You have a skill and nothing to do, and so many of the seamstresses that have been working with me are like, having purpose is just such a refresh for the mind, because when you sit there idle, time just stands still, and this seems like it goes on for forever, whereas having something to do. And one of my seamstresses is Norwegian as well, so she's been super excited about the masks. And another one is another local designer here. um, yeah, so just recreating community, and having, more sense of, I think, respect for each other and our skill sets. Whereas I felt like when I was working down in LA, in manufacturing there, in the showrooms, all those sorts of things, there was just kind of like, oh, well, that's your seamstress, and like she gets paid less. So like you don't spend as much time caring about them. Like, do they have what they need? Okay, that's all it is. Whereas now it's kind of like, I text my seamstresses every day, like, what do you need? How are you doing? Like, how are your kids? There's more community, and community in the sense that, like, I feel like we haven't known our neighbors in a long time. In our culture, it's kind of very, private up here in the Pacific Northwest, of like, you have your space and you leave other people alone and they kind of leave you alone. But this is like a different way to reconnect. And the person who's cutting a lot of my fabric right now, I'll go over there and, we're standing 6 feet apart. We have our masks on. It's very much like drop the bag at the door, ring the doorbell, and step back. But just having, this much of somebody's face to look at and talk to and connect with, That's how we keep this industry going, and that's how, you know, we help each other, we keep each other employed, we keep each other, you know, moving forward.
Getting a $1,200 check from the government is not a salve. It's a band-aid on a hemorrhage.
And and one thing I've noticed too as a fashion designer in the Pacific Northwest is there's a lot of grants here for artists. There's not a lot of grants here for fashion. You know, and I think even if there was a project where, you know, it's like, okay, you have to get together a team of photographers and models and hair and makeup and designers and like come up with a concept and then apply to a grant to get it funded. I mean, how many more people does that give portfolio and networking and just, you know, there's just nothing. There's things for painters, there's things for graphic designers, there's things for musicians, dancers, but there's nothing for fashion designers, and we don't really fit into those other categories because to them, you know, mixed materials is like soda pop cans and trash bags and you know, like reclaimed materials or what have you. So um it's that. It's also, you know, there's no showrooms here for local and independent designers. There's a couple of places where designers have teamed together and rented a space, but it's not the same as like having dedicated sales staff that are repping you to buyers. There's no market here. Nobody's coming to Seattle for Fashion Week because Fashion Week is it's runway shows and it's, you know, events, mixers and things like that. But in any other city, in LA and New York and Vancouver, like fashion weeks are targeted for buyers because that's where designers get revenue to then put into their next collection, and you know, the cycle begins. Whereas here it is directly designer to consumer. There's no middlemen, which makes it harder to be seen and harder to generate revenue. Like there's one designer who I'm working with who's a seamstress for me right now, and she's been in publications like 425 magazine and all, you know, the local newsprint has been really supportive of her, which she's talented, she's a great seamstress, it's well deserved. She said her best year she's only sold 3 dresses. Whereas, you know, I feel like if there were more opportunities for the designers to expand and get into new markets and just have somebody dedicated to that, that might be a different story.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts. They are beyond the scope of getting into at the moment, but
I know I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours.
well, no. This is all very good. And the whole point of these discussions is so that these are public. This is the you know, part of my opportunity here is to. I'm not Bill Gates. I can't dump, you know, a couple of $1 billion into solving the problem of manufacturing in the Pacific Northwest and having all these shows and all this other stuff. But the thing that we can do here with Seattle Fashion Collective is treat this as a community initiative and
Mm-hmm.
treat it as a journalistic publication and have something that I really do hope builds trust in a community, so that upon the foundation of trust and upon the foundation of transparency, we can start to build stepping stones towards that intersection of art and commerce, where
Yeah.
people generally see, or people genuinely see, that you know, Seattle has every bit as much competitive advantage as Italy does, or as France does, as Paris, Milan, as London does.
I mean, we do and we don't because, like, as you said, it all falls back to manufacturing. We can have brilliant ideas, but if they can't be made, you know, are people willing to wait 6 months, or are they willing to pay more for, you know, our higher minimum wage for manufacturing? Or, you know, some of it is educating the consumers as well. And I think that things are getting better with that. especially with things like the rise of Etsy, and Etsy's become way more professional as far as, what is available on there versus just a little bit more of like kitschy home sewing or home crafting. Um, and, I think people want unique more than what everybody else has. And it's interesting to see how luxury fashion is doing right now. And those name brands that, have been lusted after for years and years, the pivot from that to local designers and more, traditional folkloric influence and things like that. But yeah, there's no manufacturing here. You can get REI jackets made with the waterproof, windproof, everything, or you can get sails made here, and that's about it. There's nobody making T-shirts. There's nobody mass producing things like suits. I know I've called around a bunch, and nobody's doing things like inner construction, like boning or cups or anything that a nice gown would require. So then you're forced to outsource to LA or Vancouver or overseas.
Yeah, and I hesitate to bring up specific fashion houses or designers because I'm not trying to set up a dichotomy, but I do think that it is important to note that the traditional business models, they not only have been anachronistic for some time, but the pandemic shows us that it's that last Jenga piece that's about to topple the whole thing over. And
Mm-hmm.
with the fall of J. Crew into bankruptcy, Chapter 11 filings, and various other fast fashion manufacturers that are, Forever 21, for example,
Yeah.
going their bankruptcy route, and J.C. Penney, with the announcement of Nordstrom saying that they have to close 16 locations, and
Yeah.
they're rethinking about how all of their existing ones, including their flagships, are going to operate moving forward. The retail industry is hurting, the manufacturing industry is hurting, but as it pertains to someone in your position, where you do have a very bespoke business model, do you feel that the impact really comes from your sourcing, or I guess what's the biggest pain point along the
Well, I
way?
mean, yeah, sourcing's been really difficult. It's been really difficult right now because, for one, the small fabric shops here in Seattle are gone. The Pacific Fabrics and Crafts in Northgate is no longer there. Nancy's is no longer there. So, kind of your only, oh shoot, I need something right now options are running to Joann's. And especially being in higher end fashion, I can't do polyester stuff. So, even before this all hit with working with Bridal, I was doing a lot of online sourcing, and, sourcing through folks in LA, down in the garment district, which the garment district is completely shut down right now. So I can't text somebody down there who has a shop that specializes in something and being like, hey, I need this lace or I need this trim, because they can't go in. So, there's definitely had to be some thinking outside of normal circumstances with sourcing, and also lead times. If I know that I'm going to need a bolt of red cotton fabric, I'm ordering it a month and a half out right now, minimum. Just because shipping is slower, whether or not the manufacturer has it, or if I've had orders refunded 2 weeks after I've made them because they're like, oh, sorry, we thought we had these, but we don't. Um, so you're seeing them having, a lag with processing their orders and shipping and everything too. So yeah, it's kind of looking into a crystal ball and trying to figure out how to time things, how to source things, all of that. Um, and that's going to put a pinch on local designers for a while. So I'm looking at things like embroidery. I've purchased an embroidery machine, so I have that now. Things to take more readily available fabrics and make them custom, make them unique, make them special, put my spin on it, is kind of one of the ways that I've tried to work around that a bit. But yeah, it's going to require a lot of ingenuity moving forward, especially here in Seattle, because we just don't have the options of a garment district.
For reasons, of course. That I think that's going to be a whole different editorial piece that I work on. That's going to take a little bit of digging, but no. And as it pertains to you in particular, I wanted to ask on the topic of technology, in what ways, or maybe are there specific digital technologies that you've utilized that you found very beneficial to you at this time that help you stay connected and give you real-time updates as you're sourcing new materials?
Well, like I said, with sourcing the materials, you can go online and do order forms and be as forward thinking as you can be with what you'll need, but it really comes down to the people. It comes down to the people that are fulfilling the orders and checking off the boxes. So with that technology, it's not as helpful. And I found that a lot of online inventories have been wildly inaccurate. So there's room for improvement there, but I think that's in any industry right now. I'm hearing the same thing from chefs saying like, oh yeah, somebody was trying to bring me a bag of organic eggs that was $50 instead of regular eggs that was $20. And I can't make that work with my price points. So it's not just fashion. And as far as technology goes, like I said, I got an embroidery machine. So I've been learning the new technology and programs and everything that go with that, which has really been interesting. And I'm hearing about tailors who are doing fittings on Skype or Zoom or what have you for small things like, just fixing straps, not complete rebuilds. So, technology is making things easier for us. But, it's going to take everybody a minute or two to adjust to the new normal and figure out better processes, better systems, and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and a complete redesign. And on that topic, I did want to ask you, from your perspective and specific to your business model, what would an ideal system look like, or what would an ideal pathway forward look like for you?
I would love to see more small houses. The whole kind of like atelier concept of like you have a designer, you have a seamstress, you have a showroom, you've got fitting areas in a house, I think is a really great way to move forward. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are, graphic designers and then fashion designers who are like, hey, let's team together, get a space. I'll have a little office area, and then you can use me for doing your labels, your logos, like your photo editing, all that kind of stuff. And then just like new ways to share space, and not necessarily in the same creative industry, but kind of that mixing. It's whenever you throw new ingredients into the pot, there's going to be a new flavor at the end. So I think that there's going to be some really fun and interesting, like, new business structures and new creations coming out. Yeah, I mean, the more collaboration that I think can happen moving forward as far as like use of space or I would love to see designers come together and be like, hey, there's let's say 10 bridal designers in Seattle. Let's all pitch in to get a wholesale order for cheaper of, 50 yards or, 50,000 yards of whatever fabric. I think more communication and like I said, collaboration would be a good first step. And talking about what do you need? What do I need? How do we make that work together?
That's very, very good advice. And community building is, of course, going to be a critical component in the path forward. And I wanted to shift gears just slightly to talk about entrepreneurship. And you're someone that I've always admired because not only do you have this sort of entrepreneurial drive, but you have this incredibly amazing, unflappable personality where it's like if I'm going to go after something, I'm going to damn well get it. And
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask you how, I presume, of course, that a lot of that is sort of natural and inherent to you. But I wonder if you might speak to other entrepreneurs who might be listening to this, who for whom that is not their natural state. And what sort of advice would you give to them as they're trying to think, how do I be creative and how do I problem solve and what does a new opportunity look like? How can they get into that creative space of becoming a bit more of a problem solver for their specific businesses?
Well, I think so. I finished design school back in 2012, so it's been about 8 years now, and I went through a lot of trial and error. I decided, okay, there's internships for other designers that I wanted to go and do, and kind of learn from their mistakes, see how they did things, see their processes, things like that. But I didn't want to go work at a fashion house making samples for the rest of my life. I could have done that easily, but I wanted to do my own thing. And so I moved up to Seattle, and at that point I was kind of specializing in like corsetry and lingerie and things like that. Down in LA, there was way more of a market for it, whereas up here, people are kind of like, well, I want it to be comfy. I don't care so much about, the craftsmanship as much as like the price or how quickly I can get it, all those sorts of things. So it's a very different market. And one thing that I learned from that was like, you can't make your business what it doesn't want to be. And it took me a few different tries at figuring out what that was. So, doing more of like ready to wear doesn't make sense because fast fashion, was still much more of a thing at the time. And why would people spend $100 on a pair of pants when they can get something in their eyes similar for 80 or 60 or 10 at Forever 21? So just like learning to kind of find your cornerstone, and your unique talents, your unique inspiration for me was definitely working with my heritage and my Scandinavian influence was a big one, and using that not necessarily even in literal contexts, but in editorial shoots or in hair and makeup, doing more of like a Viking inspired braids and putting like metal in the hair and stones and things like that. So I think for up and coming designers or designers that haven't just kind of found that niche that they're there to supply, it's kind of an internal process of being like, okay, who am I as a designer? What unique things do I bring? And then running with that and unapologetically, like just being that for the fashion industry, for your creative outlet, for all of those things. And I think that when you have that kind of pillar of who you are as a designer, it's a lot easier to draw strength from that and to not take no for an answer, and to be like, okay, well, this outlet didn't work, so I'm going to try this one, and this outlet didn't work. What did I learn from that? How do I apply it to the next one? Because there's something for everybody out there. You go on Amazon and there's a product for everybody. They're shopping guides for gifts or whatever. Somebody is going to love what you're making. You might just need to shift it. Maybe instead of, doing a corseted cotton, not stretched dress, you do it in a jersey, but you keep elements of historical production or whatever it may be. So yeah, learning what drives you as a designer and then drawing from that when you need to is really important. And also having people in different industries too. So talking with your accountant and being like, does this make sense? For business, that's a big one. And, a lot of people, I think they are inspired. They watch Project Runway and they're like, oh, I want to be a fashion designer now. And they get a sewing machine and they start making dresses. And that's great. Be creative, make things, express yourself. But being a designer, being an entrepreneur, you have to take business classes or at least read the books. You need to understand cash flow. You need to understand sourcing. You need to understand, for me, learning about international tariffs was a hard lesson when, you know, I've had some samples made in Canada and, you know, somebody says, oh yeah, you can drive across the border with those, no problem. You're not going to sell them. And you get to the border and they're like, so you can take a Sharpie or some scissors to it, or you pay the 25% tariff, you know? So there's always, you have to be a forever learner and always try to improve. You know, there's always a better way to do something, whether it's packaging or shipping or sourcing or web development, or there's a million facets, and you can't master everything. You have to have an open ear and take guidance, and work that into what your core mission statement is as a designer, as an entrepreneur.
I think that's fantastic advice.
And
And
I mean, I could talk on that for I could elaborate for 5 hours on that, because, you know,
well,
it's been almost a decade of learning those lessons, and you know, there's a lot of books out there if you want to be a stay-at-home stock day trader. But to be a fashion designer, there's Here's How to Sew, and then there's like business books that have absolutely nothing to do with it, or they're for wholesaling, or, you know, like you got to keep reading, you got to keep learning.
I definitely agree. There's there's very, very few avenues where you can go and say, hey, I want to be a fashion journalist. You know, where do I get started? And I won't say any more on the subject other than to say you have to have an iron will and
Yes.
very thick skin.
And you, well, and the thick skin part was something I had to develop over a long time, because, you know, you put this thing out, it's your creative baby, it's your conceptual, you know, creation, and it can be really hard, but that's fashion, you know, and what one person loves, somebody else is going to despise. And just to learn how to not take those things personally, you know, take criticism and try to absorb it, and take what that person was intending to say away from it. And yeah, just try to always be in the mindset of like, improving is good, trying is good, doing new things is good. um One fallback, it, Rome wasn't built in a day, you know. You got to be willing to keep absorbing.
I definitely agree. And, you know, on the topic of constant growth and learning, as it pertains to business and marketing specifically,
Mhm.
I was curious. For you, it might be a little bit different, and for others, you know, their business model might be different. But having a very clear brand story is universal. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, what if anything? Of course, there's the face masks that you've been producing, and everyone, you know, everyone has been that's been their primary focus on the marketing side of things. But in addition to the face masks, what if anything has changed with your marketing tactics so far?
Well, I think finding common threads through other industries. So for me, you know, a big part of it, my aesthetic is Scandinavian based. So I'm going and I'm pairing with the Nordic Museum. I'm going and I'm pairing with Skull, which is a local beer hall. And then, you know, with social media, tagging is such a great thing, and hashtags and all of those things. So trying to kind of make yourself relevant to those other branded businesses, and trying to find ways, again, to collaborate. Because the way that you push your marketing, and advertising, and you push, you might be pushing in a direction over here where, you know, somebody's looking over here and you're totally irrelevant, and you just keep dumping money into advertising. You might be totally missing the market that you're going for, because they're, you know, distracted by the shiny object over here. So learning to kind of branch out and stay relevant in more ways than just fashion, in more ways than just bridal for me, or face masks or what have you. And also that brings some authority to your brand, because you're being recognized with other brands that have authority and have establishment and things like that. So that can bring a lot of value. So that's one way. And then, mentoring is a really priceless tool that I've used, as far as for the last 4 or 5 years now. I've paired up with a mentor from a different fashion house or fashion accounting or different aspects that I haven't been knowledgeable on. Um, I mean, I'll even pull up YouTube and just sit there and just let it go as far as like sewing techniques. And, maybe an hour of them I've seen. But for that 1 3-minute video where they do something that I didn't know, it's like, ooh, okay, there's new applications to learn from. And when I go and I drop face masks off at school, I always ask them, like, hey, how are things going for you guys? How's your business? Because business is business. And yeah, fashion has its weird little idiosyncrasies that are unique to fashion, but just getting a read for business in general. And when you kind of tie yourself with those other establishments and you can see how they're doing, it gives you a way to compare, and see, like, okay, is this just a fashion thing? Is this just a me thing? Or is this like a Seattle economy thing? So yeah, just connecting and making those relationships, and friendships, and not being afraid to ask questions too, because there's so many times where I'll chat with somebody who's super knowledgeable in business or in branding or what have you, and just sharing information and learning from them, or even sharing my information with them. The more you can communicate and collaborate, like, the better everybody does.
Well, I'm a bit biased, and I, of course, agree with that. And biased in the sense that that's the whole point of what I'm doing here. And the network effect, making sure that it's no one person has 100% of the answer, but there might be 100 people with 1% of the answer. And
Yeah, absolutely.
and the great thing about that is the mathematics is actually exponential. And so even though 100 people with 1% of an idea, it doesn't just equal 100% of an idea. You might end up with 5, 6, 10x beyond what
Mm-hmm.
you're expecting due to the synergy. So,
And it's interesting too, with that connecting, and the synergy and everything. The more that you put yourself out there and network and talk to people and be open to that, the smaller the world gets exponentially. There's been times where I've called people trying to source from manufacturing, and they'll be like, oh, well, I was at this big brand name store, and oh, I worked with the person who was your mentor years ago, and now there's another connection. And yeah, I mean, like, the industry, the Pacific Northwest, everything just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that presents more opportunities, and people are willing to go a little further, do a little more, help out a little bit more, if you're willing to open up and share those things and be straightforward with people. And I know in LA, one of the reasons I left the industry down there was because there was so much competition, and not even in a way that, in a business sense, on paper it was a viable feeling. It was just that, like, us versus them, they're our competition, we're not going to tell them anything, we're not going to share, that's our thing, we've worked hard to get that. And when you get that us versus them mentality, everybody suffers. Everybody suffers. And that's one thing that I'm really seeing during quarantine, and during dealing with this whole pandemic, is people are willing to share, people are willing to open up, and that's how we keep the industry growing and connected. And I really have a hope for Seattle and our fashion industry here. I see it a lot with the photographers and the models. They're amazing at being like, oh, this is what you're looking for? This person's great. Or, oh, that's what you want to do? I'm not really good at that, but this person is awesome. And you don't see that everywhere in the world, and it's so refreshing.
yes, it is. That's one of the huge things that I've loved about Seattle and the Pacific Northwest in general. And having done a little bit of work in LA, I can say that confidently it is not like that in Los Angeles. um, I'm not as young as I used to be. What's that saying? I'm not as old as I'm not as young as I once was, but I'm not as old as I think I am, or something like that.
Well, one of my favorites is from Indiana Jones, and it's not the years, honey, it's the mileage.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. In my brain, I'm still, 21, but I don't move like I'm 21. And there's a lot of young bucks who are very quick to remind me of that. And so it's a good ego check, honestly, and it causes you to realize, oh, that's the game they're playing. Okay, well,
Yeah.
my goal is not to alienate myself or really to ostracize anyone. It's to say, oh, all right, this is how the industry is working. Okay, here's how you can kind of navigate and do it in hopefully such a way that everyone still moves forward together. And
Well, and I'm kind of seeing that us versus them mentality, or that like, oh, I'm the fashion designer, like, hand me a pen kind of a thing. That's older generation, that's old school, that's dying out. That's at least my hope. Because, when you see these fashion houses that have interns that don't get fed, don't get bus fare, don't get, college credit, don't get hourly, don't get, nobody's got time for that, and nobody deserves that. And there's fostering, there's teaching, there's mentoring, there's moving forward, there's sharing. And I think that has to be the future. That's the only way the fashion industry is going to go on. We don't have time for these egos anymore. Like, what you said, there's just nobody wants to help that person because that person doesn't want to help anybody except for themselves.
I could not agree more. I think that's a very good way of looking at it. And as I kind of wrap up here, I did want to ask you a couple of quick questions as they pertain specifically to publications. And you were recently published in 425 magazine, along with a handful of other designers. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this was for their April issue, was it? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I wanted to ask you how that went.
It was really fun. So, 425 contacted me and said that they were looking to do a shoot um, with a central theme of earth, of sustainability, of recycled materials, those sorts of things. And it's always really fun having a challenge like that, or an opportunity like that as a designer, where people kind of like hand you a couple of concepts to work within, but not too many restrictions. Because yeah, it's like I don't get to use things like moss on my wedding dresses. I don't get to use things like leather. I don't get to, work with those sorts of materials often. And I mean, the final product, the shoots that they put together, it was stunning, and I think it did a great job of highlighting the local talent here. Um, and it's really cool seeing how a handful of designers with the same limitations go in so many different directions.
Oh, absolutely. I was very excited to see that. And, I've really come to respect 425 magazine. And I first learned about them, I think, a handful of years ago, maybe two or three, or maybe longer than that, because someone handed me a fashion issue. And I was like, oh, I didn't, is 425 a fashion magazine? And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
they do a lot of things beyond that. But they've been really dedicated to fashion in a way that you just don't see in the Pacific Northwest as much. And having the connection with fashion and sustainability is, of course, something that we're all about with Seattle Fashion Collective,
Mm-hmm.
trying to maintain a circular fashion dynamic, or at least pursue one, because it doesn't exist quite yet.
Yeah, yeah. And
So,
I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of local press that have, years and years and years in print, and big titles and recognizable names. And when it comes to their style or their fashion sections, it's, oh, here's something you can get at Nordstrom, or here's something that you can get online from any, big box department retailer. And it's frustrating as a local designer because it's like, you guys have this amazing platform, and you're doing something like, hey, here's a sandal from J. Crew. Or, here's a wedding dress from David's Bridal. And it's like, but to be a designer, there's not really agents for us the way that there are with models. Um, and with PR, I mean, I've gone down a couple of different revenue avenues, and it's not like actors, it's not like authors. There's not really that same support for designers. So it's like you have to be your own PR person, but there's just not that same interest. Like, I think that those big print catalogs, newspapers, etc., they feel like if they go with something local that's not as known, that I think, and I could be reading into this inaccurately, but that they feel like if it's not a name brand, if it's not something that's a household name, that they lose some sort of notoriety or some credibility or something. Whereas I think 425 is doing the exact opposite. They're showing, like, here's local designers showcased in incredible ways. I mean, like, the shoots that I've worked on with them, my jaw hits the floor. Like, they're doing beautiful work and bringing credibility and visibility to the local industry. Same with you. I mean, like, there's so many times that I read interviews that are published by your hand, that it's just like, wow, thanks for asking the important questions. Thanks for making fashion designers who are successful seem like business people and entrepreneurs, and that we have, the gall it takes, the iron will, instead of just, oh yeah, I can take a pen and make a pretty picture and it's sent off, and that kind of air of austerity or whatever that has existed for so long.
Well, the truth is, I'm just a knucklehead, and I think we're all trying to figure out what the next steps are. And this is just my step. This is what comes of it remains to be seen. But I'm definitely playing a long game here, and the
Yeah.
idea is that I hope that if I die tomorrow, this thing that we're starting together will live on, and because it must. And if I'm not the right guy to do it, that's fine. No ego. Someone's got to do it. And I hope
Yeah.
someone comes along and does it better, because every day is a new day for me. And I'm still figuring quite a lot out. But what I have learned, I've learned several things. And full disclosure, I reached out to you, of course, and you'll be participating in an upcoming issue for Seattle Fashion Collective. But I've learned sort of the role of publications, and I've learned the limitations of publications, and I've learned some of the expectations, especially from publications that are financially sponsored, and what you can and cannot say, and what their metrics are, how they measure success, and what are the goals, and how do they do marketing, and so forth. And I have no such restrictions of any kind, which frees me to have these kind of long form chats. And
Mhm.
but I did want to, and of course I'm putting you on the spot, but my expectation is that you'll just speak honestly and from the heart. Don't spare my feelings. What is it? What is it that you really need from publications, since so many fashion publications are going out of print and have been for a while, and even the future of Vogue magazine and what it transforms into is uncertain. What is it that you specifically are looking for, and how can publications best help designers, especially during this time as we're going
Yeah.
through?
So one publication I have a really amazing relationship with is the Norwegian American. And Lori Ann Reinhall, she is the editor over there. And one thing that I've learned working with her throughout years of highlights that she's done, whether it's on my masks or on wedding dresses or what have you, is that I show a story, but a publication tells the story. And it can encapsulate the reader and entrance them and really bring, you don't just buy a dress because you like how it looks on the hanger. You put it on, you try it on, and you see how it transforms you. And that's what print and publications do for fashion. Because we can post pictures on Instagram and people can see things and say, oh, okay, that's how that dress fits, or oh, that part's sheer, or what have you. But to tell the story of why, and to romanticize the reason that, we work 14-hour days, and that, we sew through our fingers, and all of those things, the blood, sweat, tears that people don't see, it's all worth it when somebody sends you an email and says, hey, I saw your publication, or I saw you in this magazine, I saw you in this newspaper, what have you, and I just fell in love, and I heard your story and why you're doing what you're wanting, what you're doing, and that's why I want to support you. Because you can post the most beautiful picture in the world, but it doesn't mean as much to people unless they know the story.
Well,
Publication is the why.
yeah, I definitely agree. And as far as the editorials goes, for sure. And again, this is biased. So for whoever's watching this, I'm completely editorializing here in fully biased opinion that editorials, of course, matter, and publications do as well. But
yeah. Because you could have product shots on the website that show, okay, here's the highlight of the button, or here's the very nice placket we put over the zipper that we think you'll appreciate. But the editorial is where, in the ethos, the filter that came into the designer's mind that said, I'm going to spend 20 hours making that, and here's why. And that editorial shot, when it's pulled off perfectly, the model, the framing, the editing, everything that goes into it, and you just have that picture that's like, wow, and takes your breath away and makes you react. Fashion's all about reacting. We could all wear jeans and black t-shirts and the same sneakers, and like, God, wouldn't that be boring? And fashion can be political, and it can be all of these other things, and why do you buy that shirt? Why do you buy that hat? Why? That's what fashion answers.
yes, I definitely agree with you on that. And my last question that I have for you before I let you go um, is sort of, you can frame this to sort of big picture, or you can frame it to maybe something more, more downstream. But if you had to give one message, like if this was your last message you were going to give on planet Earth, and it was going to be broadcast to
No
everyone,
pressure.
no pressure, yeah. If you had one message, especially during this time, and maybe specifically to the fashion industry, um, what would that message be?
Don't let go of why you're doing what you're doing. And whether that's somebody who, is a laid off employee that's picking up crocheting, or whether it's a fashion designer who their numbers are down because people aren't spending what they used to on clothes because they're scared during the recession. The minute that you let go of your why, that's when it all starts to slip through your hands. And when things are rough, you hold on to that reason. Um, Everybody on this earth, even if they were born as twins, raised by the same parents, went to the same school, and were taught by the same teacher, everything throughout their life was exactly the same. We all have a different perspective. And it's our perspective that makes us unique. And people have to remember that and honor that, and not sell that short, that we all have a story to tell, whether it's through writing or fashion or photography or what have you, and to hold on to who you are and to keep sharing. How many amazing master painters, their work was never seen until somebody was clearing out the attic after they died. Do it for yourself first, and don't let anybody take that away from you. That's your power.
Well, and that's a very empowering message. Thank you very much for sharing. And Madison, thank you very much for your time today. I greatly
Thank
appreciate
you so much. I really appreciate it, and what great conversation. And it's fun to, have a short amount of time to tackle some of these issues that could be so much longer. But it's great to see that the industry here is being taken seriously, and that designers are being recognized, and that we're on a slippery slope right now as an industry in Seattle. And it's through you and through other publications too that we get to hopefully keep trudging up the hill and working hard and making it so that this industry in Seattle doesn't disappear. So thank you, Anthony, so much for giving us space to tell our story, and holding our space to be who we are.